Okay, but is carbohydrate really the villain? Do you really need to cut it out? Is it sustainable? If you're someone who loves carbohydrates and thinks they're the villain, stay with me until the end of this video because I'm going to reveal a lot of things about carbohydrates. Well, I always believed that cutting carbohydrates was the fastest path to achieving a healthier life. For years, I heard and repeated phrases like, carbohydrates make you fat, the body doesn't need them, or the less, the better. But at some point, I started questioning whether all this really made sense. Was the human body made to live without carbohydrates? Is completely eliminating one of the three essential macronutrients really safe? The topic of carb-free foods has always sparked strong opinions. On one side, there are those who passionately defend extremely restrictive diets based solely on proteins and fats. On the other, there are those who criticize this approach as unsustainable and even dangerous in the long term. In the middle of this debate, something is often lost: the physiological truth about how the body reacts to the absence of carbohydrates. Today, I want to explore this topic in depth, not with guesses or trends, but based on science, biochemistry, and what human physiology truly shows us. I want to analyze what carb-free foods really are, how they act in the body, what the real risks and benefits are, and, most importantly, what happens when we decide to almost completely remove this nutrient from our diet. Well, I'm Dr. Joni, and on this channel, I give health and nutrition tips for people over 40 who are seeking better quality of life through food. So if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Leave a like to support me and share it with more people. Now, let's move on to the topic of today's video. When we talk about a carb-free diet, we enter a territory where biology and culture meet. I've always found it curious how such an essential nutrient for life managed to become a villain. And yet, this transformation didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of decades of diets, trends, and partial interpretations of science. To understand what really happens when carbohydrates are eliminated, we need to look at the human body as it is, a complex biochemical machine that operates with precision but depends on a delicate balance between energy, hormones, and nutrients. The fundamental role of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the main source of energy for almost all cells. When we eat foods that contain them, fruits, cereals, tubers, or grains, the body converts them into glucose, the simplest and most usable form of sugar. Glucose is the direct fuel for the brain, muscles, and practically all tissues. The human brain alone consumes between 100 and 130 grams of glucose per day. It represents only 2% of body weight, but consumes about 20% of all the body's energy. This shows how vital glucose is for cognitive functions, concentration, and emotional stability. When someone drastically cuts carbohydrates, the body loses its main source of glucose. To avoid collapsing, it activates emergency mechanisms. The most well-known is ketosis, a metabolic process in which the liver converts fats into ketone bodies, molecules capable of partially replacing glucose as fuel. This adaptation is impressive. It was essential for our ancestors' survival during times of scarcity. But there's a difference between using ketosis as a temporary response and trying to maintain it as a permanent state. Clinical studies show that in the first weeks of severe restriction, many people report increased energy, reduced appetite, and rapid weight loss. This happens due to lower insulin levels and the release of stored fat. However, much of the initial loss consists of water and glycogen, the carbohydrate reserve the body stores in muscles and the liver. Once this is depleted, the body starts using fat and protein as energy sources. The physiological impact of carbohydrate absence. Prolonged absence of carbohydrates deeply changes metabolism. The liver becomes overloaded as it tries to produce glucose from amino acids, a process called gluconeogenesis. This requires using proteins from muscle tissue, especially if protein intake isn't sufficient to compensate. The result can be loss of lean mass and a reduced basal metabolic rate, making it harder to maintain weight over time. From a hormonal perspective, extreme restriction also affects the production of insulin, cortisol, and sex hormones. Insulin, often demonized, is essential for many functions beyond blood sugar control. It plays a role in protein synthesis, fertility, thyroid balance, and even bone health. When insulin levels remain chronically low, the body interprets this as being in an alert state, which raises cortisol, the stress hormone. This constant increase can cause irritability, anxiety, sleep difficulties, and accumulation of abdominal fat, the opposite of what many people seek with a carb-free diet. Among women, there are reports of menstrual changes, reduced libido, and thyroid dysregulation in long-term low-carb protocols. This occurs because the body reduces the conversion of T4 to T3 thyroid hormones to save energy. It's a natural defense mechanism, but it can lead to fatigue and slower metabolism. Effects on the brain and mood. The brain is the first to feel the impact of carb deprivation. In the first days, people often report brain fog, lack of focus, and irritability, what some call the keto flu. This term describes the temporary symptoms that appear while the brain hasn't fully adapted to using ketone bodies. Over time, this adaptation may partially occur. Some people report increased mental clarity and focus. However, neuroscience studies show that cognitive performance in complex tasks tends to drop when glucose is scarce. This happens because, although the brain can use ketones, it still needs a small amount of glucose for certain functions, such as neurotransmitter synthesis. Serotonin, for example, depends on the amino acid tryptophan, whose absorption is facilitated by the presence of carbohydrates. When they are scarce, serotonin production can drop, and with it, mood, well-being, and sleep quality. This explains why extremely restrictive diets can cause irritability, sadness, and even depressive symptoms in some people. The impact on the intestinal microbiota. Anyway, I learned that health doesn't come from exclusion but from intelligent balance. The problem was never the carbohydrate itself, but the excess, the quality, and the context in which it's consumed. Ultra-processed foods, refined flours, sugary drinks, those are the real enemies. But a plate with vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and fruits shouldn't be feared. It should be understood. The search for a perfect diet, free of one nutrient or another, is a modern trap. The human body is a complex system that works in harmony. When we try to force it to operate in extremes, it reacts, sometimes with quick results, but almost always with hidden consequences. Maybe the secret isn't to run away from carbohydrates, but to learn which ones deserve a place on our plate. And in the end, that's what both science and human experience have in common. They remind us that extremes never sustain life. Balance does. Here we end. I'll see you in the next video. Another often ignored point in carb-free diets is the role of the intestinal microbiota. Our gut is home to trillions of bacteria that help digest food, produce vitamins, and regulate the immune system. And the main food for these bacteria are complex carbohydrates and fiber. When we eliminate these foods, the microbiota loses diversity. Recent studies show that carb-free diets reduce the number of beneficial bacteria, such as those from the Bifidobacterium genus, and increase species associated with intestinal inflammation. Without fiber, the intestine becomes slower, the protective mucus of the intestinal wall decreases, and the risk of constipation and digestive imbalance grows. Furthermore, this intestinal dysbiosis is linked to metabolic problems, mood changes, and even immune disorders. Nutrition, at its core, is a science of energy. No macronutrient is good or bad by itself. Everything depends on context, quantity, frequency, and quality. Carb-free diets can work as a therapeutic tool, but not as a universal lifestyle. The human body was shaped for metabolic flexibility, not for permanent extremes. The most recent science in metabolic nutrition shows that the balance between carbohydrates, proteins, and fats varies from person to person. Factors such as genetics, microbiota, age, gender, and physical activity level influence how each individual reacts. While some thrive on a ketogenic diet, others develop fatigue, loss of performance, and hormonal imbalances. Metabolic individuality is what separates an effective diet from an unsustainable one. In the end, the real question is not how to eliminate carbohydrates, but how to choose the right ones. Those that nourish without causing inflammation, that sustain the body without overloading it, natural, whole, and minimally processed carbohydrates that feed not only the body, but also the invisible ecosystem of the gut and the mind. In the next video, I will list some good sources of carbohydrates that nourish our body, so subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. I'll leave in the description of this video some links to supplements that can help your health, helping you have better sleep, a healthier intestine, and a better gastrointestinal tract. So check them out below.